I'm Suzanne Hanselman. I'm a partner at Baker & Hostetler, practicing in the corporate and securities law area. Work a lot mostly with public companies, counseling the boards, and work a lot with general counsels. Our panel is going to be focusing on the skills and expertise that are required to effectively counsel and interact with board of directors. And I think whether you're in a law firm or in-house, and depending on your goals, whether it to be a partner in a law firm or general counsel in-house or something in between, we often talk, when we talk about associate promotion, that's the term that's often used. Is that a boardroom lawyer? So we're going to talk a little bit about what that means and how you can acquire those skills. And we're very fortunate to have the panelists we have today because they have a broad experience both in the role as counsel to the board as well as board members of both nonprofit and public companies. So I'd like to introduce them briefly, and their bios are included. I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but just to give you some highlights, because I also hope that as they go through their stories and experiences, they give you a little sense of their background and how they got to where they are. Sitting next to me is Rhonda Ferguson. Rhonda is Executive Vice President and Chief Legal Officer at Union Pacific, which is a role she recently took. Prior to that, she was with First Energy Corp as Vice President, Corporate Secretary, and Chief Ethics Officer. She, before that, served as Assistant General Counsel and Assistant Secretary with Faro Corporation. And I'm happy to say before that, she was a partner of mine at Baker & Hostetler, although she started her career with Thompson Hine. She has an undergraduate degree in engineering from Northwestern, and she has a JD from Case Western, which she earned in 1994. Next to Rhonda is, I'm sure you all know, we've seen Jerry here several years, and thank you for your continued participation. Jerry currently serves as General Counsel, Executive Vice President, and Secretary for Forest City. However, unless you were avoiding the news because you were tired of hearing about the Cubs or you're tired of hearing about the election, it was hard to avoid the news, and we're very excited that Jerry was recently announced the President and CEO of the Music Settlement, and will be transitioning there in the beginning of the new year, March. And so I will let Jerry tell more about that story, I hope. But anyone who knows Jerry and knows her passion for that organization knows how lucky they are to get the combination of her passion and her skills to lead that organization. So congratulations, Jerry. And then at the end of the panel, last certainly not least, is Kathy Kilbane, the Senior Vice President, General Counsel, and Secretary of the Sherwin-Williams Company. Kathy's been at Sherwin-Williams for almost 4 years now. Prior to that, she was with American Greetings Corporation as Senior Vice President, General Counsel, and Secretary. And prior to American Greetings, I also had the pleasure of practicing with Kathy for several years at Baker & Hostetler. In fact, Kathy was one of my very first interviews. Kathy also, and I think everyone on the panel has experience serving on boards of nonprofits, and we'll talk about that role and how that can be helpful. Kathy also serves on the board of a public company, the Andersons, and that's a diversified agribusiness company, and in that capacity, she chairs the Compensation Committee and is a member of the Nominating Corporate Governance Committee. So as you can see, lots of great experience here, anxious for them to share their stories. Just a little bit of background so that we're all on the same page. First of all, if you do have questions, we will have time at the end, but feel free. I have been told because this is being webcast, you do have to use a microphone. So there's one in the center, and there are a couple of handhelds, but please don't let that deter you from asking questions and interacting, because that will make this a better experience. Most of you have probably had corporate law or some exposure to corporate law, but we just thought we'd give some very basic background to sort of put this all into context. The board of directors is the body of individuals that are elected by shareholders that oversee the business of a company. The board is responsible for the overall strategy of the company, and also while management, which the board elects or appoints, is responsible more for the day-to-day operations. And most boards do a lot of their work at the committee level, and it's common to have, especially, public companies are required to have independent audit, compensation, and governance committees. State law and corporate governance documents, such as the Articles of Incorporation, the bylaws, regulations, committee charters, corporate governance guidelines, detail sort of the duties and responsibilities of the board and its committees. And I think every organization, even though that's kind of the basic structure, has their own unique ways of how they go about with their governance. And clearly the role of the general counsel and secretary may differ. So I think initially, if each of you could just give me a little, give us an idea of your role within your organization and how you interact with the board and its committees.
Sure. Good afternoon. I am officially 100 days into my new job, so I am the baby of the GCs here. I joined Union Pacific in July of this year, and our organization is structured as we have actually a joint chairman and CEO, and our board, our 10-member board, which he is a member of, actually has the nominating committee, finance committee, audit committee, as well as compensation committee. And my role as Executive Vice President and Chief Legal Officer, I do attend all of those meetings and counsel the board, but we do have a separate Executive Vice President and Chief Administrative Officer who also is our Corporate Secretary, and she attends those as well. But basically, we interact very closely. They're members of my team. I have a team of 250 that are spread out across 23 states. But my corporate team, my corporate and transactional team, actually supports the corporate secretary function for Union Pacific with my oversight.
Go down the line here. Hi, good afternoon. It's really great to be here with you today. Still a little bit hoarse from screaming at the games the other night. I saw the rest of you were too, I'm sure. The role of general counsel has really, really changed in the 21st century, and it's not what it used to be. I took over my job after the first general counsel was there for 50 years, and he pretty much, handled the legal matters and went to board meetings. But a month after I got my position 14 years ago, Sarbanes-Oxley was enacted, and later on Dodd-Frank, as you know. So our role has expanded greatly, and it's actually a wonderful thing. So it's not just doing legal work, and it makes it more fun, and I know Kathy will agree, and Rhonda will certainly be into this. The description's more broad. So what my role includes is business initiatives, ethics. I'm the chief ethics officer. Corporate governance. I'm the board liaison. I attend all the board meetings and committee meetings. Communications, do policy making, work with the other executives for enterprise risk management, corporate social responsibility, environmental and social governance matters that are very big for institutional services. I'm very involved in strategic planning, and executive sponsor of the Women's ARG, the Associate Resource Group, and so on and so on and so on. We've just got done working with Bain. So one of the big things we just did was go through a REIT conversion, a real estate investment trust, and that was 18 months of work in 11 months, 4,000 closing documents. It was a miracle, but it had to happen like Y2K, and it did, and I survived it. But it's just much more than the law, and I think they now call. And when we started, when I became general counsel, Kathy was one, and Janet Miller, and Ann Harlan, who's here back there, and we kind of have this GC chick thing going on. And now there were 5 of us that used to get together, and now I think Janet Miller keeps adding to the group. I think there's 65 or close to 70 women in Northeast Ohio that are general counsels of public, private, and nonprofit organizations. It's very cool. They call this the pink part of the C-suite, which I think is a little degrading, but definitely in all the meetings. And I'll just say that Bain helped us going through this operational excellence 2 years and zero-based budgeting and so forth, taking overhead out. And so now everything's an acronym. So I talk about meetings, oh my goodness, EOC, PMO, CEOC, EO, all these meetings, but they're all the meetings of the C-suite and the executive meetings and project management meetings and all of that kind of thing. So it's very exciting. I've been there. When I leave, it'll be over 27 years. I've never been bored for 5 minutes in my entire life. So It's great.
I just wanted to follow up quickly on one thing you said, and you've been in that role long enough. So, because it seems to me, from my perspective, that the emphasis on governance in Sarbanes-Oxley and Dodd-Frank, it really, I think, as you said, it's made the job more interesting. But I think it's clearly elevated the role.
That's what I was trying to say. Your
there's
CFO is now your best friend, or should be, or. It absolutely has, in terms of visibility and the work that you do and the prominence of the position. Absolutely. Yeah, and the other thing is, and I'll get into this more in my stories, I work for a family-controlled company, as you know. The Ratners, Millers, Shafrans control the B stock. It's 10 votes, A stock's 1 vote, and that's also complicated my life greatly. I love the company, I love the culture, but governance folks and investors aren't so happy about dual-class companies and so forth.
Good afternoon, and it's great to be here today and great to see all of you. I'm the Senior Vice President, General Counsel, and Corporate Secretary of the Sherwin-Williams Company. Sherwin-Williams Company is a 150-year-old company. It's been in Cleveland since its founding 150 years ago. We have about $11 billion in revenue. We have 42,000 employees around the globe. We sell into virtually every country we are legally permitted to sell into. And the neat thing about paint, or the unusual thing about paint, is one of its primary ingredients is frequently water, so you don't pay a lot to ship it. So we tend to have manufacturing facilities in a lot of far-flung locations, which makes things very interesting. I've been there, it'll be 4 years in January. I am, as I said, the secretary of the board, so I attend all of the board meetings. We run our committee meetings, audit and compensation, meet simultaneously, so I can only go to one of them, and I usually go to audit. As Jerry said, Sarbanes-Oxley is kind of a hot button, so that's when you kind of want to pay a lot of attention to. And then nominating and governance, I also go to those. We run those at a separate time. I echo what Rhonda and what Jerry have said about the role has changed, and it's much more proactive, much more business focused. In addition to kind of the typical legal stuff, you get called on to do things that you may not have the title for. You're a little bit of an ambassador without portfolio. Things like compliance, ethics, cybersecurity. You know that if it goes wrong, it's ultimately going to end up in the legal department. So an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So you kind of get proactive and try and make sure that everybody's doing the right training, and you're setting up the right processes and procedures so that it doesn't eventually have to land in your department. In addition to my day job at Sherwin-Williams, I'm on the board of the Andersons, which is about a $4 billion diversified agribusiness company based in Toledo, Ohio. They have grain trading, grain storage, railroads, fertilizer, and a very small retail component. And in that role, I chair the compensation committee, and I sit on the nominating and governance committee. And that's just it's one of the most fun things I do. I really enjoy it. It's just been a great learning experience.
I just want to put a plug in for that too. To the extent that you can get on nonprofit boards or private boards or public company boards, it's really great experience, because that certainly informed our experiences and our skills to take back to our companies and vice versa. So I highly recommend it, as I'm sure Rhonda and Kathy do.
And I think there's a growing recognition. I mean, back when I was kind of coming up through the ranks, there was this, oh, you don't want a lawyer in the boardroom. You can hire a lawyer. You don't really need a lawyer on your board. I think that way of thinking is changing, particularly as the compliance burden and the regulatory burden is getting so much greater on companies. There's a heightened recognition. I'm also, in addition to the Andersons, I'm on the board of the Cleveland Clinic. And when I was asked to go on that board, you kind of had the conversation about, you're a great organization, but please understand that you're not going to be putting my name on the side of one of your buildings. I don't have that kind of personal wealth, but how can I help? And they said, we think we need that perspective, the perspective of the governance and understanding the regulatory environment. So
I would also echo the importance of nonprofit experience, because in addition to the skill sets and learning different areas, also it's great to meet other people in other areas too. So it's also a great networking tool.
So you've all hit a little bit on the role of the GC, and it clearly is, beyond that of just being a lawyer. So can you describe a little bit the skills that you think are make for an effective GC? Kathy, you want to start?
I think
You had names.
it's more than having technical competence. It's a little bit of an intangible. It's having that kind of executive presence and commanding a little bit of respect is the wrong word, but having people value your advice. And part of that is having the business acumen to understand what your company does and how it works. Is my mic on? Okay, sorry. Okay, sorry, Marianne. Okay. So part of that is the having business acumen. And when I started out, I thought business acumen was something you could only get if you had an accounting degree or a finance degree. And as an English major, I sort of thought I'd never have business acumen. Well, what I've come to learn is business acumen is one of those things that just means intellectual curiosity. It's asking about the company. It's asking, how do you make money? How do you lose money? Who are your customers? What are their hot buttons? When I went on the board of the Andersons, when they called to ask me to go on this board, I told my husband about it. And my husband, who grew up on a farm, famously said to me, "Honey, you wouldn't know a grain elevator if one landed in our backyard." And he was right, but now I know grain elevators and I know tractors and fertilizer and all sorts of interesting things that I never knew about before. But I think that kind of business acumen and understanding the company is really critical because it allows you to look at how you practice law and to be able to think about how do we use the law and legal tools available to me defensively to keep competitors from coming after us, things like patents or things like contracts, and how do we use it offensively to put our company in a better position? Can we look at changes in import-export laws to say, hey, they're opening up Cuba, how can we get in there, and how can we get in there fast, and how can we get in there and sell quickly? So you have to be able to kind of marry the two, marry the law and marry the business acumen.
And I'd like to add to that, if I may. Kathy's right, to understand the business and the organization, but also the strategy, very important that you know what the strategy, the goals, the mission of your business is. And I know as Ann Harlan has left her practice at where were you, Ann? At Smucker's. To do consulting with firms. I mean, she often says that even outside law firms, she's surprised at how they don't perhaps always ask we in-house counsel what our goals are and what the objectives are and understand what our clients want as well. Team building is really, really important too, and we'll get onto that about how you have to hire and develop your team. And you need strong budget management. Kathy and I have been on a lot of panels together, and we really have to watch our budgeting because we're not a revenue center. So the company looks very closely at that. You're also a trusted advisor. You've got to be a really good listener. You've got to counsel the C-suite and the board. You've got to be a good listener, and of course, you have to be the ethical person in the company. You have to have that moral compass that sets everybody on, certainly, and we're all aware of that after WorldCom and Enron and everything else. And finally, I think what's really important for all of us as women even is leaders. I was reading a Harvard Business Review article on leadership, and they were comparing men and women. And believe it or not, women, this is a great article, women beat men in 14 of the 16 leadership characteristics that they were looking at, but where they did not surpass the men was in strategy, in vision. So it's something that I think no matter what position you are in your company or your firm, you got to try to think more strategically.
I would agree with that. Also, I think it's very important to understand how not just legal decisions, how they impact, but also to be able to look through the entire framework through a lot of different lenses. That's what was very shocking to me when I went from actually working at a large law firm to being in-house, because there's also a political impact, the community impact of decisions that you make. How will your employees react to this? So those have to be thought of in totality when you give legal advice and as you shape the strategy. So that's just something to always keep in mind as well.
So understanding and hearing about those skills, and I know both Kathy and Jerry are very effective and active in mentoring and developing their attorneys. And
That's a favorite part of my job.
And I'm sure Rhonda will be too when she gets more settled in hers. But so Jerry, could you first share some of what you think is effective for that development?
Sure. Well, the other thing that's on governance lists is, and we do a lot in the company, succession planning, right? So we have succession plans for everybody in the C-suite, but I love doing this. I have a wonderful department. It's a small law firm. It's about 32 people in Cleveland, and then I think I've got 12 people in New York and some in Boston and Denver. We've just, through this process, have all centralized also as well. It's a very collegial group, and I'm just really proud of them. But a lot of them have come up through the ranks, and what I did is I tried to kind of match a law firm, and we don't make partners, obviously, in-house. So what I did is I put in place a promotion system where you come in as staff attorney, then you're corporate counsel assistant, associate general counsel, and that sort of thing. So people get more and more responsibilities as they rise up, and they also have the title to show that they have more responsibility in their experience. But again, I always emphasize to my team, it's really important to understand the mission, the strategy. So now that we keep going through strategic planning, I remember my CEO said to me, my goals for the board, he gives all of us his goals. Now they need to cascade down to me. So my goals mirror my CEO's goals. And then my lawyers, my managing attorneys and lead attorneys, their goals should mirror my goals. But I remember having one lawyer come up to me and go, well, how do we even do this? I mean, I close deals, I finance deals, we do leases. This doesn't make sense. I said, are you kidding me, David? I said, the CFO's goal, financial sustainability. Okay, so what do? We do joint ventures, we do financings, we sell assets. I mean, all of this stuff is revenue building and all around the CFO's goals. And then as we mapped it out, everybody saw that what their work is important to the company. It impacts the strategy and the goals. And I think that's important for people to know. What you do every day, it's not siloed. You really impact the business. Relationships matter. This is my very relationship building. I came into Forest City not having any idea I'd be general counsel in 13 years, taking over after Bill Warren, who'd been there 50. And it wasn't even that way. It was just I learned the entire business from the ground up. I was excited and passionate about it, but I built relationships throughout the whole company. So very, very important. And again, Kathy and Rhonda would agree, you have to become the go-to trusted advisor. Accountability is really important. Team playing, none of us does anything. I get so much credit for doing that REIT. It was me and like 300 other people. I mean, it wasn't me. I couldn't have done it with all these other talented, smart, great people. So again, teamwork is very important. Communication skills, responsiveness. We all know, not being a department of no. I actually sat next to, at Nicey Price one year, a CEO who told me that he didn't like to go to his general counsel because she always said no. And I thought, oh boy, that's not good. We may say no, can't do this because our credit agreement has a negative covenant. You can't guarantee payment of loans, but let's figure out what your goal is and how we're going to do this, how we're going to accomplish this another way. And just a willingness to learn and grow. I mean, I'm still growing. I'm still learning after this many years, and it's just still a learning process all the way along. And the other thing I would advise all of you, too, that I've enjoyed and we all have enjoyed is get yourself out there, be on panels, give presentations, write papers. I mean, again, it just makes you an expert in your area, but then you meet other people, and then there's just a great synergy of that and sharing. So that's most of it.
I agree that kind of developing talent is one of the most energizing parts of the job. It's also where you feel the greatest sense of responsibility, though, because these are people's futures in their lives, and you need to make sure that, in some ways, I feel almost like a quasi-fiduciary obligation. Like, these are people that, like I look at my great corporate lawyer, Erin Ryan, sitting out there who, bravely with her whole family moved from Chicago so that she could come work for us at Sherwin-Williams. And I appreciate that is a big deal for a family, and it's a big commitment that they made to me. And I feel like, I owe that commitment back to Erin and the others to help them develop their career. So I'm probably pushier than you would sometimes like in terms of, CLEs that I want them to go to. On the nonprofit side, I like to have all of my lawyers engage in a nonprofit because it gives them exposure to thinking about things beyond the law. When you sit in those nonprofit board meetings, you hear about things like HR issues or operational issues or real estate issues that may be a little different than what you hear in your day job. The other thing I like to do in developing talent is to kind of move people around a little bit. And that's countercultural. It's countercultural for Sherwin-Williams because Sherwin-Williams was the kind of place where people, before I got there in the law department, people would do one thing and they would do it for a very long time. And they may be they may only be an inch wide in their expertise, but boy, were they a mile deep. We're changing that a little bit. So, for example, you may have seen in the news, Sherwin-Williams is trying to buy a company called Valspar. It's about an $11 billion acquisition. And as you can imagine, much like Jerry's REIT deal, it's very all-consuming. We got a lot of people working on it. So I had to move one guy off of a division to kind of go work on this REIT. And I called Erin. I said, any chance I can get you to pick up the legal work for the Protective and Marine Division? And she, of course, raised her hand and said, I'd love to. Picking up more experience in a different business line that way is a great development tool. It's a little bit, there's an element of jumping into the deep end of the pool, though. So it can be a little bit scary.
But I echo that. I mean, don't be afraid of challenges, and don't think, oh, I don't have the skills yet, or I don't have the ability. You can do it. You can do it. Just take it on.
Well, actually, Rhonda is the
Yeah,
one who most recently has gone through this transition. Can you, and closest to the experience, can you tell
if
us?
I could back up just a little. I had the fortune to participate. Our company recently launched their employee engagement survey, and the results came back just recently. And the funny thing is, I'm the neophyte, and I had the strongest engagement scores. So my other members of the C-suite kind of teased me, and they said, Ferguson, what are you doing that we aren't doing? And really, I had the benefit of coming in, and one of the first things I did was I did a town hall via video satellite because I wanted to introduce myself to my entire team my way at the exact same time. So I set that up with 23 different locations, and I told them about, personal things about me and my family, what motivates me, funny stories, what my expectations are, with the caveat that I wanted to hear from them. So one of the first things I did was I just sent everybody a four-question open-ended questionnaire. Basically, what do you believe that the law department does very, very well? Number 2, what are our biggest areas for improvement? Number 3, what should we stop doing now / do less of? And number 4, what should we do more of or start doing? And after I had introduced myself, I told them that this was coming. It shouldn't take very long, but I really wanted to hear from them. And then I told them I also made a pledge that I wanted to meet and either have breakfast or lunch or dinner with every team member. So I spent a lot of time on the plane. I was almost like a rock star, forgot which city I was in. We love you. What city is this? But they really responded very well to that. And I took all of the feedback I got, since it was so open-ended with the comments that came back, and I put together a task force and made some initiatives and put a lot of people who, and they just felt like this is somebody who's coming in and is not saying, we're broken or we need this, we need that. I really wanted to listen and learn, because to me, the tenets of leadership is really showing people that you really care. And I wanted to get to know them, learn about what they do. They were experts in their fields. They know a ton more than I will ever learn about the railroad business. I'm learning every day, and I think I'll be learning until I retire. And they really appreciated that. So, like I said, it's early, but I am happy that I got the highest score for the engagement.
What a great thing to do, and I think that really sets up a lot of trust, too. Good for you.
So, and I don't know as much background. Who were you coming in to replace? I mean, how was that?
I replaced a woman who had been with the company for 32 years and had retired, and yeah,
Jerry sort of
so
starting anew.
yeah,
He didn't retire. He waited 8 years.
You just kept there.
Another story.
So we've talked about counseling the board and some of the challenges a little bit, but I wondered if each of you could talk particularly about a time that there was a particular challenge that you handled, how you dealt with it. In hindsight, is there anything you would have done differently? Sure.
Probably the biggest challenge for me was getting to understand the business. And I think in hindsight, what I probably would have done was gotten on a plane a lot sooner. Kind of what Rhonda's doing is a great thing. There's something to be said for FaceTime. And we were having this conversation at our table at lunch a little bit about, the kind of millennial approach of working from anywhere. And there's some value to that. But there's also some value to getting to know somebody and being able to sit down and understand them. And I think you going to see them carries a lot more weight. And I think if I had been able or had thought to go to a lot of the business facilities that, however far-flung they are, to be able to go see them in that first year on the job would probably have helped me get out in front of kind of when the problem came up, there'd have been a relationship there to call on that might have been a little bit deeper.
So Kathy's heard my story before, but as I said, I work for a family-controlled company. And when we converted to a REIT, we went from Ohio to be incorporated into Maryland, and Maryland's very REIT-friendly. That's where the REIT statute was born. And they're very protective of companies and maybe less so of shareholders. So the whole governance initiative anymore with institutional shareholder services and investors and Glass Lewis are to have greater shareholder rights and not less. So my challenge was when we were negotiating and putting together the new charter and the new bylaws, we wanted to do things that we didn't currently have under Ohio law. So for example, in several instances where you need to go to shareholders for approval, in Maryland, you could have the board, for example, change bylaws or change the amount of shares you have, that are authorized and capital needs without having to go to shareholders. They can just do it unilaterally. So my problem was, the family owns the B stock, so they were very concerned about me taking rights that they currently have as B shareholders and A shareholders as well, but they own the B, they control the B, away from them. So that was really, and Mary Ann's sitting out there, and she knows when we did another earlier transaction that this is called related party when you do things with the family. It can get a little bit challenging. So I had the family running to me, telling me that I had to look out for them, and yet, right, who do I represent? I represent the company, and I represent all shareholders, A and B, and I had late night calls to Kathy Kilbane and Ann Harlan and Janet Miller in tears, I think, just, help. It was a tough 3 weeks, but I got through it. And I have to tell you, later on, the family was very appreciative of my diplomacy and being able to walk that fine line and kind of negotiate and find the balance there. The way that I was able to do it is it was an exercise in researching what they currently had under Ohio, their rights, where we were going in Maryland, and also with the market, what best practices is, to show them, okay, maybe your rights here will be a little less, but this is best practices, and most REITs do this. Anyhow, it was tricky, but the board did end up passing the charter and the bylaws, but it was challenging.
I think it's very, I'm trying to think of the word. It gets very tricky when the CEO might have a different perspective than the board. It's a delicate dance. So really, the general counsel, chief legal officer, and corporate secretary role is, it's really a game of finesse. You have to make sure that you are doing your role and you are not breaching any confidences, but by the same token, you do represent the corporation, and you know that the board also has a fiduciary duty. But there are many times when maybe they don't see eye to eye, and you're kind of the I call it the conscience of the company, to make sure that the right decision is made, and you do that through building trust and rapport and having managerial courage to say this doesn't quite pass the smell test, either to a board member or the CEO. And sometimes those aren't aligned, and it takes a certain intestinal fortitude and finesse and gravitas to kind of deal with that. So I think that's really something that you have to develop, that muscle, and because you will have to use it often.
Can I just add something? We all have had a lot of challenging situations in our jobs, very, very challenging, but I know that I can sleep at night, and Rhonda's right. I mean, you just have to do the right thing, and if the advice and oftentimes the client doesn't want to hear your advice, but you have to give them the right advice. And I also, just because this is so current, We just went through a transaction that was announced, finally became public a week ago, but another very unusual transaction, and that is we've got, and we'll talk more about this, what keeps me up at night, shareholder activism. So we've got a hedge fund that's our second largest shareholder that came to us and wants us to collapse the dual class of shares so that have the family give up their control. So the board, in exercising their good fiduciary duty of loyalty and care and representing all shareholders, formed a special committee. And this was just really challenging the last 2 months, trying to navigate and negotiate with 3 New York investment firms, Goldman Sachs, Lazard, Morgan Stanley, hiring 2 large New York firms, having to deal with communications firms in New York, Joel Frank and Verbindenen, just keeping all the balls in the air, everybody straight. And the conclusion was, and we published it, is they did not come to agreement. So right now the dual class is staying intact. And we're now we had an earnings call this morning dealing with what investors are saying and what the market thinks. But again, very, very challenging, but something I learned that I always do, and I think it's good for you all to do if you're in-house, and something you should ask for if you're in firms, is I always try to, and I'm sure Kathy does this and Rhonda, give as much information and preparation to my outside partners in firms. So I'll tell them about the culture. I'll kind of explain the politics. I'll tell them about what kind of communication my CEO wants or their business client inside. So that, because sometimes law firm folks, I mean, if they haven't been in-house, they don't get it. I mean, you get it more when you're in-house, as Kathy said, and doing the business. But one example was I had one firm in there kind of on the company side, but said to me about the family, at one point, well, the tail is wagging the dog. And I said, no, you've got to understand, they are the dog. They are the dog. I mean, but he really needed that explanation. And finally he agreed.
And I think one of the things, and talked about, and I wanted to follow up because it's not exactly, but it follows up on something Kathy said too, is when you are outside counsel and trying to communicate either with the board directly. I mean, I think sometimes when I deal with younger attorneys, that's part of the problem is learning how to communicate, especially with non-lawyers. I mean, when you're in a law firm setting, especially as a young attorney, you're used to talking to senior associates and partners and people who already know sort of the lay of the land from the legal landscape. And so to then try to learn that skill of how you give advice with not going into too much legalese and turning people off, that's a real skill. And it reminded me when Kathy mentioned about face-to-face meetings and what's lost by people working, mobile and out of the office is so much of how I learned to communicate with clients it wasn't from going to CLEs, and it was from sitting in John Gerline's office, waiting for him to get off the phone so that we could talk about the research I had just done for him. And he was on the phone with a client, and I would hear how he would solicit the information and how he would process that and how he could gather what he needed to be able, and then how he gave the counselor advice. And I don't know how you replicate that without actually watching it. And no, it's not always billable time, and yes, it does require, but it's so invaluable. And these are all those soft skills, and so.
Just to add one more thing. If you're in-house too, and even for you outside folks, oftentimes our clients think they're lawyers. So just the other night I was going back and forth with one of my business guys in operations, and he said, well, in my legal opinion, and I had to write back, I said, so Bill, how long have you been practicing law? And he said, between 10 and 10:25 p.m. tonight, but you can keep your job.
My CFO asked me the other day if he could, if he sent an email and put attorney-client privilege on it, would that work?
I get that too.
When did you get a law degree?
I always say, I won't practice accounting, you don't practice law.
Yeah,
It's
right,
like a good deal.
So true.
If I can add one more thing to what Suzanne mentioned, one of the big things that I've learned from being on a board that influences or informs how I work with our board is the importance of setting context. When you're in a day job and you're living that deal or you're living that issue 24/7, you sort of assume a level of context. And you have to remember that the board learns about these things 4 or 5 times a year at meetings, and it's more of an interstitial exposure to it. So it always behooves you to go back and sort of reset the context. And you may feel like, oh, boy, we just talked about, this chapter of the book, and here we are again. But it can really be a good ground laying to help have the issue understood.
And to add to that, for Kathy, we found that we were just giving them voluminous books. I mean, these people don't have a lot of time. They're CEOs, they're traveling to Asia, they're on other boards. And to learn how to summarize, I mean, to give them a 50-page paper to tell them to read for the committee meeting doesn't work. Summary page on top, bullet points, highlight it, as you said. And just, and I always I try to anticipate their questions. So I'll make sure I'm bringing the charter with me, the bylaws, and you get to know personalities well enough. You know, Stan is going to ask this question. I know he's going to ask this question. And if he doesn't, I'm going to tell him what the answer is anyway. But you learn, it's the care and feeding of directors, and you learn their particular quirks and what they want.
Yeah. The only other thing I would add is that you get cool points for brevity.
That's true.
I've seen people crash and burn doing board presentations because they're dazzling everybody, going into minutia, naming all the statutes. They really want to know give the context, what do I need to know, and what do we need to do? What are the risks, and what's the path forward? And then take questions and sit down. When people kind of deviate from that, to me, I just see a downward spiral, because I like to tell my team also that the higher you go up in the organization, you do need to know the detail, but that's for questions. You got to give them an executive summary type of report. So.
Okay, well, Jerry, you alluded to this, and we started talking about it a little bit, but as a general counsel, what does keep you up at night?
It's the shareholder activism right now. So we didn't do what the hedge fund would have liked us to do, so we're going through the activist playbook. So what are the next steps? What might they do? How are we prepared? I did a lot of research with what are our vulnerabilities, and then assessed what our defensives are under Maryland law, state law, and then certainly we're fortunate because the family does control the board and the company, so we're pretty protected in that way. But you still worry about bad publicity and the stock spiraling down, where we get precatory proposals. The family only owns about 4% of the A shares, and A's elect A's and B's elect B's. So if an activist comes in and they propose a slate of 1 to 4 A shareholders, they very well may get them on. We're a plurality voting company still. It's not majority voting, so it'll just be the top people. And even though I have wonderful, outstanding, brilliant A directors, including Dr. Scott Cowan, who was dean of the business school here and president of Tulane University, and just an amazing, brilliant gentleman. He's been on our board for 27 years, and nobody likes long-term board members anymore, so he could get knocked off. So that's what I'm dreading, and that's why I'm staying for another few months before I transition into my new role, is to help them through proxy season.
For me, and it's different in my day job and in the board. So let me talk first about my day job. Regulatory is a big worry for me on a pretty constant basis. The regulatory environment in the last 5 to 10 years has become very intense. We have, as you might expect, we have the EPA, the SEC, and the FTC all looking at Sherwin-Williams on a very regular basis, and we have very robust relationships with all of those organizations. But we are also now dealing with the FAA. That would be the Federal Aviation Administration. We make paint. We're dealing with the Department of Homeland Security, because there are components that you can buy at one of our that go into making paint that can also be used for making bombs. So we have a lot of regulatory stuff we have to fill out to make sure that we keep track of where all that goes. FDA, the FDA, Food and Drug Administration. Now, again, we make paint. We don't make anything that you eat or apply to your body, but we still have FDA compliance we have to do. It's just a constant feeling that you're never really sure where the next arrow is going to come from, where the next letter I'm going to get that has a government agency on the letterhead that says, your store in Peoria did X wrong, and hoping that whatever that is just a minor issue, and that it isn't going to be indicative of something bigger or isn't going to bubble up into something bigger. And a lot of times when it starts to bubble up into something bigger, it's not because there was conduct that gave rise to it. It's because there's either a political or a media intensity to it that kind of spins it out of control a little bit. And that's very frustrating. And in my role at the Andersons, I think the thing that keeps me up most at night, as Jerry said, she talked about activists, and we several months ago had an activist take a position in our stock it's all public, but it hasn't been there hasn't been much activity in that. But fiduciary duties and thinking about your fiduciary duty as a board member and remembering that your core role as a board member is that you are a steward of the shareholders' money. And everything you do, you have to view through that lens of how am I protecting the shareholder and maximizing shareholder return for the shareholders. I am a steward of the shareholders' money. And just keeping that in mind.
That's a lot of things that keep me up at night. But primarily regulatory concerns too. Everything in this room, including handbags, our clothes, everything was on a rail car. Even till my kids were actually shocked to learn that when they use Amazon Prime, that's like one of our top customers because it has, in order to get to you, it's sitting on a rail car. So the things that really keep me up at night is if there is a catastrophic derailment. We have a common carrier obligation to carry certain hazardous materials. If there is a release of that into like a waterway or something like that, I mean, beyond just the obvious, impact on human lives to the company, it could be a make or break. So. And everything in between that. That's like the worst case scenario for me of like based on my 100-day tour of what could really kind of just rip the company to shreds.
The three of us are a real fun bunch.
But we do have fun. We really
We do, yeah. This is the best job I've ever had. And I've had a lot of great jobs because it's always something to think about. There's always another twist, another different component or different layer to think about. It's very nuanced. But that's pretty much, we have environmental concerns, obviously. We're regulated by the Federal Railroad Act, so it's a whole nother body of law that I got a chance to dig into. They don't have, the normal workers' comp, they have their own separate FELA claims with that. 85% of our workforce is collective bargaining. We have 47,000 employees. We also have issues with borders. We are the only railroad with access to the 6 gateways to Mexico, so that's a whole nother set of issues to stay up at night about. So it's just a lot of regulatory concerns, environmental concerns, liability concerns.
And you all, obviously, you all have a lot of regulation, and there's so much, the law is continually changing. And even, I know in practice, when you're dealing with a relatively small portion of the law, it's hard to keep up with it. And you all are very proactive as opposed to reactive in your positions. How do you keep up on the law? What do you rely on?
Actually, I historically have been involved with a lot of different organizations, professional organizations. That's one way that I stay apprised. Also, a lot of relationships with a lot of the law firms in this room and beyond always give us updates or
People actually read those over?
I do. Every morning I kind of go through a whole list of different periodicals that kind of just see what are the headlines, and and I rely obviously very heavily on my team as well for their different areas of expertise.
And I would agree with that, and we do read the circulars. Yeah, so thank you. Please keep sending them. But I would also say that Kathy referred to the compliance. We've got a huge compliance effort going that we report to the audit committee every year, and we assess all the laws that our business has to rely on. I mean, corporate law, environmental law, real estate laws, all of that. And then who's responsible, kind of assigned who's accountable for me. So HR has ADA and workers' comp and all of that kind of thing. So we also rely on other experts within our business. And then we send surveys out every quarter and then ask them what the risk is and what's going on, that sort of thing. So that helps a lot too.
Let me address it 2 ways. First is kind of how I personally keep up with stuff. I'm also, you have that sort of standard list of stuff you read, and for me, it's every morning checking the Wall Street Journal, the Paint and Coatings Technology Journal, which is that compelling journal. We have a there's a New York Stock Exchange tool called NYSE Connect that gives me kind of a lot of real-time feedback on what the analysts are saying about our company, which is kind of a good early warning system about what is on their mind and what they're worried about. Also, I have sort of a pile of periodicals. It's like my airplane reading that is in one corner of my office that whenever I know I'm going to be traveling, I grab a few of those and throw them in my bag and try and get through. And that's usually Association of Corporate Counsel is a really good tool for us. And the law firm circulars. The second way, though, that's probably more effective for me is the way I have my department structured, and that my lawyers are divided into teams that support business units. So each one of our major business unit has its own kind of mini law department with litigators and business lawyers and intellectual property lawyers and employment lawyers. And then cross-matrixed on top of that, each of the lawyers in my department has a major and a minor, kind of like your college major and minor. And that major and minor is the substantive area of law that they agree to be the subject matter expert in. So, for example, Erin's is bankruptcy because she was a federal bankruptcy clerk before she went into practice. And that means that they agree to be the go-to person for that area. And they agree to stay current in that area. So if something is coming up or evolving in that area, their job is to make sure it gets bubbled up to me or up to somebody higher up in the organization.
And I would add one more thing that's really helpful to us is a publication called Practical Law. So they have forms and all kinds of great articles. And I had to know some obscure securities rule and how I would follow it. And they just do a great job of simplifying the law and making you know what you have to do. And then for those of you who do corporate work in here, I know Rhonda and I maybe Kathy, I'm on the national board of the Corporate Secretary Society and Governance Professionals, but there's a local chapter here, Ohio. I was president of it. Rhonda was just president of it here in Ohio. It's an excellent organization, very active, and that helps you with your securities laws and governance laws.
Since we do have mostly women in the room, could you tell us, do you think there are the special challenges or advantages for being a woman in the boardroom, either as a board member or as general counsel?
I think we're going to need that bottle of Prosecco, Andrea. I think, yeah, there can be challenges. Part of it is the differences in communication style that we've talked about a little bit before. I had a great mentor who was on a board, and I kept I circled back with her and said, I'm having trouble kind of getting them to understand and, getting this point across. And I kept trying to be very polite and very respectful. And finally she looked at me and she said, honey, you ain't running for homecoming queen. And trying to help me understand that sometimes you need to state your point a little more directly and not be afraid to own it. Women frequently are very good subject matter experts and don't give themselves enough credit for that. Kind of like my prior comment about when I talked about business acumen, and I thought there was some magic to that when really all it was asking a lot of good questions and being willing to dig into it. So I think that kind of subject matter expertise, if you can communicate it appropriately, per Rhonda's comment, can be a real advantage.
I think the disadvantage is that we're still a minority. So Forest City still got that magic number of 3. If there's 3 women on the board in the room, that it does change the dynamics, and I think it does. We do have 3 women, and they're brilliant. They're amazing. One came from Bain. One runs her own investment company with Penny Pritzker and Debbie Ratner, who's Albert's daughter, and she's a lawyer by training. She was a prosecutor, and she runs our Washington office. And they're just brilliant, impressive, amazing women. And we've got amazing guys on the board too, but they listen. But I think it's because of their experience, and they just bring. It's like anything with diversity. They bring different experience, different perspectives, just a different approach to the issues.
I agree with both what Jerry and also what Kathy said, but my only tweak is, I guess earlier in my career, I tried to conform and sort of be someone that I wasn't. And it wasn't until I started to bring Party Rhonda to work, if you will, to not have this mass of switching. It really kind of changed the trajectory of my career. I was more comfortable in my own skin. This is how I communicate. It helped me to forge relationships on a personal level with people that may not at first glance look like we had anything in common. I found out we had so much in common. I think, this is like the advice I give to my daughter, focus on what you have in common with people. We're all in the same boat. So I don't really fixate anymore as I did when I was younger about, well, I'm different or I should do this way. When I kind of got out of that box, people responded to me differently as well. It's like, that's Rhonda.
Kathy, are you the only woman on the Andersons board?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
There's another woman who is president of AT&T Ohio, who's on the board, and she's just terrific lady. I think the other thing that's really helpful is having other women that you can kind of look to, and you pick up a lot of those subtle clues or subtle cues about how they dress or how they carry themselves or how they communicate. That helps. And I have to single somebody out who was a great help to me when I was a lawyer at Baker and Hostetler. I can remember telling one of the partners was like, "Well, who do you look at? Who do you want to be?" And I said, "Well, I want to be like Marianne Jorgensen." And he said, "She doesn't work for our firm." I said, "But she's this great corporate lawyer, and she's just an icon in the community among corporate lawyers. And Marianne, you have always been a great role model. So thank you for that."
Great, for all of us. Thank you. Trailblazer.
I think now we have some time. If there are questions, we could open up to the audience. Anyone? If not, you're going to get a longer break. No questions? Does anyone have something they want to share in closing? Actually, one thing I wanted to ask them, but I didn't warn them about this, so they might shoot this down. But every time I'm in front of these people, they're so impressive. I think as a young attorney, you can't help but be sort of awestruck. It's got to be intimidating. But as they've alluded to, that it doesn't sound like this is a lot of fun. I know that they are each, wonderful people, have very rich personal lives. So, do each of you share something that's not on your resume, but that makes you seem more like we could be you? It wasn't fair because I didn't give them a warning.
What I shared with my team, since I just recently joined the company, I said this is a little known fact, but you're going to hear a lot about this as we get to know each other. When my husband and I built our current home, we actually built a karaoke stage in the basement that's very prominent with stage lighting, fog machine. We have 19 live instruments, and it's set up with cocktail tables. And usually when people come over for the first time, they said, "Oh, who's the talented musician or artist in the family?" And we always kind of look at them and say, "You." And they were like, "I don't understand." Then after we have a few cocktails, it's something about being on that stage. So I've instituted the first annual law department karaoke holiday party this year. So I'll let you guys know.
Great ideas.
I just always confess I'm an I Love Lucy sitcom every day. I mean, some days the balls are all up in the air. Some days, I'm juggling, and some days they're all on the floor. So you just kind of take each day as it goes. And I've just had a wonderful life. But I've also, it's not perfect. People sometimes look at us and they'll say, "Okay, you've got a lot of success and you can't identify." Well, I've had my share of personal and professional challenges and mistakes and failures. And, you just got to keep going forward and keep going on. And I think something I strive for very hard anymore is authenticity. I mean, that's the highest compliment I can get if somebody tells me that I'm authentic and genuine. But on this karaoke thing, so I have to tell you my first experience. My husband is a physician. He's an academic physician. He travels around the world. And so I got to go to Japan with him many years ago. And the Japanese don't let their wives, at least about 15 years ago, don't let their wives out very often. So I felt like such a hussy. I had this red dress on because I love red. And I'm with 15 Japanese doctors, and I'm at a geisha dinner, and they're all trying to serve me because they're very polite, and everybody's shoving food at me. But afterwards we went to a karaoke bar, and I was singing Beatles songs with Japanese doctors. So I'm going to come.
That's awesome. For me, it's probably two things. One is I am the mother of two absolutely wonderful girls that I adore. I have an 8-year-old and a 12-year-old. And I am a soccer mom. Suzanne and I will be down at a soccer tournament together this weekend. So we'll be hanging out in lovely Columbus, Ohio. And I'm a dance mom. And they're just they are the light of my life, and I just adore them. And the second thing is that I'm a breast cancer survivor, and that is the most horrifyingly frightening experience I've ever been through. But it makes you really focus on what is important in your life, and that authenticity point, or that bringing your true self to the table. Your tolerance for doing anything else goes way down. So, and I know it's not October anymore, but because I have the microphone, I'm going to make a public service announcement. And for those of you who have not had a mammogram in the last year, please, before you check the Nordstrom sale, before you go on Facebook or Pinterest, please call and make that appointment.
And I will say, Kathy, not only is she a soccer mom, but for any of you who have had kids who played soccer or probably hockey, you know how gut-wrenching it can be to be the parent of a goalkeeper. So she's actually a soccer goalkeeper mom, and I always joke because it's like dog years. Every minute of the game feels like 7 when your kid's in the net. So that's probably one of the toughest roles she has.
It's my most stressful job.
Yeah. So unless anyone wants to add anything else, are there any questions? We are a little early, but maybe we can take a break. All right. Thank you all.